Hi, this is Gary Collins, the creator of the Primal Power Method, and I'm here with...
Nicole Hellendorn, California Paleo Kitchens, Orange County chef, coach, and all-around badass.
That's right. That's why I have you on. I got to balance it out because, I got nothing. So I got to bring the...
You got something. You got an Etna feature.
That's right. I got a book, it's like a comic book kind of health, but no. No, we're going to talk about grains and beans today since it's a very timely subject with the Chris Kresser fiasco on Dr. Oz, which a lot of people know I got involved in that and did a rant. And I have an interview with Dr. Lauren Cordain that will be out. By the time this comes out, the interview will obviously be out, but look out for it on my blog. And but we think it's a good topic in general. We had actually scheduled this before, and it just so happened that all this fell into place for me. But I know you deal with it. The grains and beans issue, anytime you get a new client, it's one of the first things they just kind of look at you and their eyes roll back in their head and they're all, you got to be kidding me. I can't eat grains or beans. Oh my, what am I going to eat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little, most of my clients are pretty generally familiar with the basics of paleo or think they are when they first meet with me. But I just keep it really simple, really high level. I talk about inflammation, the inflammatory effect, how it's an biomarker for pretty much any disease, systemic or otherwise, is inflammation, and how when you're eating things like grains, it's inflammatory to your immune system. Then you've got a whole issue going on where your immune system attacks itself, and that's where we get inflammation. So yeah. I kind of keep it very high level, just kind of give them that little spiel on grains. We go in depth if they want more information. I do differentiate between gluten and grains. A lot of people don't realize that, for example, corn is a grain.
Absolutely.
Although it is technically gluten-free. Rice is a grain, but is also gluten-free. There's those finer points that we delve into, although I, have them eliminate all grains to start. Beans, I think, are a little bit more confusing for people.
Yeah.
I think people kind of have caught on as a remnant of kind of the 90s carb phobia and prominence of like an Atkins-based diet. They get that bread is not so good for them. But I think that they mostly associate it with carbohydrates rather than digestive function and inflammation.
Yeah.
Whereas with beans, I think it's a little bit harder for them to wrap their heads around because there is a lot of information out there saying, beans are a great source of fiber, they're great protein, there's no fat, all those kinds of buzzwords people have come to pick up on over the last 10 years in terms of health and fitness. So beans, I find, are a little bit harder to explain to people.
Yeah.
And they have also a little bit harder time letting go of beans, I think, because certain cultures, Middle Eastern cultures with hummus, garbanzo beans, Mediterranean cultures love garbanzo, all kinds of different beans, Hispanic cultures, black beans, Cuban style beans a million ways.
Yeah.
I think that it's just a little bit harder for people to grasp the concept of why beans would be bad for them. How do you explain it? How do you approach it?
And that's interesting. I find the exact same thing far as the beans issue. But for me, I do the same thing. I talk about inflammation. And I also talk about the modern grain as opposed to an heirloom grain or a grain from 150 years ago. The grains we eat today are completely different. They're hybridized. They're maximized for, especially wheat is maximized for its gluten content. It has like 100 times the amount of gluten that it once did. It's a short grain grass now as opposed to a long grain because of what it used to be. And as far as height too, they call it dwarf wheat now because it grows faster and it's easier to harvest. And that's what I key on too is inflammation. But also I tell them, like we were discussing a little earlier, is the difference between a seed and grain. People get a little confused on that one too, and it's really not that big of a deal. Just look at a seed as something usually encompassed in like a fruit. Corn's tricky because technically it's a grain and seed at the same time. Mm-hmm. Quinoa is a seed and not a grain. And, but to tell them, just think of grass. If it's a grass-looking plant, that's a grain. Right. Otherwise, it's more than likely a seed, but don't worry about that because they tend to have all the same protections. Plants do not want to be eaten.
They don't want their genetic and reproductive material compromised.
Yeah,
so if you consume it, it's going to lash out against you.
Exactly, it's going to fight you. Yeah,
it's crafty.
And I think that's what we missed a lot in growing up and being taught about health is that the defenses that plants have. They do. People always look at plants as kind of they don't have have any feelings, or, you know, you get into that whole kind of touchy-feely thing, but they actually have found that plants communicate over miles underneath through the root system and the dirt and the fungus. They can communicate through large distances and alert other plants in a area that they're having something happen to them or harm, to bring up the defenses from like animals, birds, bugs, so they can bring about their own natural defenses to protect themselves. So people don't look at plants that way either. And I go, well, yeah, plants are far more complicated than we're taught.
That's true.
Yeah. And if you're going to eat a seed, what's it do, Nicole? We talked about it. What happens to it?
Depends on which seeds. I mean, then there's certain. I think that's another point that gets a little confusing for people.
That's true.
Seeds are confusing because you know, we can talk all day about the health benefits of things like chia seeds, sesame seeds.
Yeah.
But grain seeds are a completely different beast. You know. So I find that I try not to go to the seeds thing right away with new clients, just depending on where they're starting and what their comprehension is. But we'll get into that later. You know, I think the seed thing can be very confusing for a lot of people. And it's like, well, why can I consume some seeds but not others? Why sunflower seeds but not, you know, wheat seeds or, you know, sprouted quinoa or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that gets into a little bit of a finer point, but I don't usually have clients fight me on that. They generally get the whole no grains thing. Another thing that I think is really interesting, that's a parallel that I see come up a lot in paleo eating, is that we are eating grains, you know, traditionally in terms of breads, the whole dwarf wheat that we have in today's society, in mass quantities that were not available back in the Paleolithic era and around those times. It's kind of similar with like the whole nut flour thing, where people are like, oh, well, it's paleo, it's made with almond flour. And it's like, that's so many almonds that you never, you know, just that sheer amount and magnitude.
Yep.
I'm kind of seeing that attitude shift towards like the nut flours. You know, it's kind of, that's where I draw a parallel. I'm like, you shouldn't just be eating so much of it in this refined form regardless.
Well, it's substituting one, because people have to realize too that nut flours, even though some are lower carbohydrate or lower glycemic, because of the fact that they contain so much fiber and they have fat in them. So it definitely dulls the insulin response, but it's still got a lot of carbohydrate in it.
Yep.
And if you eat a lot of nut flours and you eat a lot of nuts, you're still probably consuming too many carbohydrates. And nuts still have the same protections as a grain has. I mean, it still has, you know, phytate. It still has, some nuts will still have, you know, lectins. I mean, you can't get around it. And that's what I try and get away too, because everyone pounds lectins and phytate, and you can get into a million different scenarios. You can soak them, you can boil them, and actually Chris got into that beans are great because you can cook them and all the phytate's gone. I'm all, no, Chris, actually that's totally not true.
I just feel like if you have to put that much prep work into eating something anyway, you shouldn't eat it. Basically, anyone who's ever had corn on the cob or like, you know, refried beans or beans, however, you know that they're not that easy on your digestive system. Beans, a magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you chew. If you can eat it and poop it out whole, don't eat it.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's clearly not something that your body's comfortable breaking down to a molecular level. So I'm just like, I drive that point home with a lot of people, and they always laugh. I'm like, if you can just pass it, if you eat it and it looks the same coming out as it did going in, probably not so easy in your digestive system, right? Yeah. So that's kind of one of the points that I make with a lot of people, is kind of stay away from something like that. Yeah.
Me and Dr. Cordain got in during the interview during that too, is, hey, we're not telling anyone that they can't ever have beans or ever have bread ever again. But what we got with Chris was, he was saying you could eat beans 3 times a day, or up to 3 times a week, and dairy up to twice a day. And we're all, whoa, hold on. And we're not attacking those foods. What we're saying is, the human digestive system is not meant to we know to consume those foods that much, because it causes, again, inflammation. They have protections, and dairy is a tricky issue. You know, dairy, are you getting whole fat, grass-fed, you know, unpasteurized, unhomogenized? You know, there's a lot to dairy that you have to know. It's not the same across the board. You just can't go get a brick of cheese and all cheese is the same. They're processed differently. Different forms of cow's milk are used, whether they're given the hormones, whether they're not, you know, whether it's grass-fed, whether it's not, and then is it grass-fed, but they still gave them hormones. You know, it's
a slippery slope. Honestly,
really is.
It's almost too much to keep up with.
Yeah.
And then again, I feel like that's another thing where the magnitude issue comes into play. It's like literally the amount of lactose, casein, whey that's in cheese, that's a concentrated huge amount. That's like if you were just drinking milk straight from a cow in a, wild environment and it was raw, it was fresh, that's completely different than like a block of cheese where you eat like 3 slices of it. It's just you're concentrating all of those inflammatory compounds into one basic food product.
Yeah.
It's the same way I feel about the almond flour breads. It's the same way I feel about, the grains in general. It's like we're eating them in such a mass quantity that wasn't normal.
And that's what we were talking about is, sure, you can eat them.
It's crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah, you could go have beans. If you want to have some beans with a stew that you made for a couple days, fine. But don't do it every single day or 3 times a week because your body's going to eventually break down. The phytates, the lectins are going to take over, and it's going to start perforating your gut. You're going to start having inflammation in your gut. Now you're going to start having the immune response. And the thing is, we don't talk about this from not having a background in it, because me, you, people like Heath, Squire, we've all gone through the evolution of the diet ourselves. It's not something we're just regurgitating by searching on Google.
Right.
It's something that we've lived and that we teach. And it's because, I had to go through this process where I kept the beans and grains in for a while, but I changed them. I went to organically raised grains. I went to whole grains. I went to organically raised beans or grown beans. And then I realized, okay, that didn't work. And I didn't improve. I felt better as I replaced certain foods and went to organic foods and got rid of a lot of processed foods. But I kept those items in to the very end until I finally said one day, I went, okay, I've got to make a change. I've got to take these out. And I've got to see what happens when I take them out. And I fully took them out, did the whole 30-day. I never went back. And I'd taken them out one time before during a cleanse. And I did that for 2 weeks. That's where I started. It was an organic cleanse, which was eating food, juicing. It's not the one in the box with Jillian Michaels that will kill you or give you whatever.
It wasn't maple syrup and lemonade?
Yeah, exactly. It was a real one. It was a Whole Foods-based one. And I did notice a drastic difference from those 2 weeks, but then again, I started implementing those foods back in the grains and beans. So I had to go through, and eventually you're eating that one sandwich a day. I think we've all got that story. What did we eat for lunch? A sandwich. That was the last grain we were having every single day. And that is enough to completely throw your immune system completely out of whack.
Yep. See, I'm kind of the opposite of you, whereas years before paleo, I mean, back when I was like in my early teens, I did not do so well with dairy. And I would never have made the claim that I was lactose intolerant because that sounded like such like a wimpy thing, like, no, it's like, makes me really gassy and fart a lot. So I knew that when I had like skim milk, whole milk, cheese, ice cream, I was guaranteed to be gassy. And it was just one of those things where I had actually cut out dairy way before I'd even heard of paleo. So when a lot of people tell me like, oh, I just can't give up cheese, I'm like, okay, sure. If you think that you can't, that's great. But for me, it was actually the easiest thing to give up because I had already had years of not really having too much of it under my belt before paleo. It just didn't agree with me. So so I cut out grains and beans later, kind of more when I learned more about paleo and a different way of eating. But for me, dairy was just one of those things where I was like, I can't do this. Yeah. I don't trust the sources. I don't trust the magnitude. Yeah. It's like, who has a gallon of milk? That's disgusting.
Oh, milk destroys me. Just absolutely destroys me. And I had the same problems as a kid too. And, I had allergies to all of it. The biggest things I tell people that I work with, the first thing when we talk intolerance or food allergies, I say the 3 biggies: dairy, grains, citrus. And they go, citrus? I go, trust me on this one. Mm-hmm. Citrus was my last bugaboo that I didn't get, but I wasn't a big citrus guy. I didn't eat a lot of oranges or anything. I just don't eat a ton of fruit. I eat more berries. I always have. I've always liked berries more. And I have fruit trees around my yard, lemon and orange, and I think I have some tangerines too. And I would go out there and just pull them off the tree and eat them. And I kept getting all these still get sinus issues, and my back of my throat would itch. And I was like, oh. And I knew that as a kid. That's the thing that blows me away is citrus bugged me as a kid, but no one ever put citrus together with that. And it's bizarre why we just fight citrus because we're told that juice and orange, it's so good for you. And then,
Well, that's a perfect
yeah.
example of when you really have to know yourself, and like what works for you may not work for everyone. It's like if you know something bugs you, I don't care if it's paleo or not paleo. If it doesn't make you feel good, don't eat it.
Well, yeah, and you're still fighting that thing. You're still trying to get your immune system back, and you're trying to rebuild it. So foods that were bothering you will not bother you once you regain your health and you repair your digestive system, which is a tricky thing too, because it takes years. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. Read books, and certain people say, "Oh, I can heal your gut in 30 days." I go, "No, not really. You can help a lot, but it takes a lot longer than 30 days." And for me, though, citrus, honestly, with clients, almost every single person realizes they have issues with citrus. So I think it's a lot more common than people think. I had a guy that was dealing with real issues of puffiness, and he would swell up and start to retain water. And he goes, my stomach will just burn, and I feel horrible. And we're talking, and I'm all, "What are you eating? Did you change your diet?" I mean, he didn't eat well to begin with. I mean, he's eating a lot of garbage. But, he just said, "No, it's just been really bad over like the last month." And he's drinking water with lemon in it. And he goes, "Yeah, I've been drinking."
Great for a lot of people, but if you're one of the ones that's not.
Helps with digestion. And I go, "Well, how long have you been drinking the lemon in your water?" He goes, "Oh, I started doing it about a month ago." And he goes, "Yeah, I've noticed that my throat, will tingle and that my lips start to burn." And I go, "When you drink the lemon water?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go,
Stop drinking the lemon water.
That's why I went, "Stop drinking the lemon water." And like a week later, he's all, "Huh, duh."
Duh.
It's all gone. Yeah. And so, even though that's a little tangent on grains and beans, but it's just the common. And grains and beans are the one that, it's just so much effort to ferment, to soak, to sprout.
I don't like to mess with it.
And there's another thing where people do this thing too, and I did it, is they say, "Well, I can still eat oats and brown rice and because it doesn't have gluten in it." And I go, "You know what? Actually, that's false." And it's for two reasons. It doesn't have as much gluten as wheat, but oats and rice do have gluten. And if it's a fine line, because molecularly there's little differences in grains as far as they don't consider it gluten, but the molecular structure is so close that it actually has the same reaction in the body. So people who go gluten-free and they can't figure out why they have all the same conditions for the most part that they had before, they're reduced, but they don't go away, especially people with celiacs, is because they're continuing to eat grains that they think are gluten-free, and technically they're not. That's
how I feel about quinoa, for sure.
Oh, quinoa is a big one.
Big,
absolutely.
Huge example. It behaves the same molecularly, chemically in your
Yes.
body, and gives you a lot of the same symptoms. I couldn't figure out for the longest time, again, pre-paleo days, I would eat like a quinoa bowl for lunch, and it's like vegetables, lean, protein, and then like a cup and a half of cooked quinoa. Oh my God, my stomach would be in just terror. It would be awful.
Quinoa is one of, I think, the most misrepresented healthy grains, seed out there. And I had the same issue. I experiment a lot with my body. I'm a goofball that way. I've done Weight Watchers, I've done Atkins, I've done Slim Fast, and people freak out and they go, "Why would you do that?" Because I got to figure out how other people feel.
Right.
So I do that a lot too. I'll add foods back in just to see, and I've done that with quinoa. I don't even know how many, probably 10, 15 times where I experiment with it.
I don't mess with quinoa.
Instantly.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Within 10 minutes, it will terrorize me. Not only my stomach, I get a headache, my eyes start to burn, and my neck starts to hurt. And that's how sensitive I am to it now, because I don't eat any of that stuff anymore. And that's another thing. People don't realize that they're actually in pain because now they're desensitized to it as far as the foods they're eating. They don't realize how crappy they feel until they take them all out, and then they change their health. And I fight this battle all the time, and I fought it with Chris Kresser. Why would you punish yourself with beans and grains or dairy when you don't need to? And 70% of Americans are lactose intolerant. So you're rolling the dice that you're the 30% that maybe not. That's just stupid to me. So why would you do that? And Dr. Cordain said that too. He emphasized, he goes, "I just don't understand. So if you smoke a cigarette a day, it might not give you cancer and it might not kill you, but you know it's bad. So why would you smoke a cigarette a day?
But you're not a smoker.
But exactly.
But you're also not a smoker. Yep. You don't identify as a smoker.
Exactly. And it's the same thought process and I just think that in that sense, he's just naive in it. And then he admits that he doesn't eat beans in the end because they mess him up.
Yeah.
That was bizarre. Why are you promoting beans if they mess you up and you know they mess a lot of other people up? And he goes, well, I'm just, everyone's different. And I go, everyone's different. But trust me, Chris, you obviously haven't worked with enough clients. Beans mess people up. Almost everyone I've ever dealt with, it messes them up.
There's a song about it.
Yeah. Why do we have this song from when we're little kids? You know, and that's why I have in my book. That's funny you brought that up. In my book, I have a little page because I didn't want to get into the grains and beans and get into lectins and phytate and all the inflammation. I didn't want, because I felt it was too complicated for people. I just said, you know what? Here's the deal.
Yep.
You know, one page. Here's why you shouldn't eat them. And one part was they just don't make you go toot toot. That was my title for beans. And yeah, I mean, it's just
not worth the hassle.
Yeah.
Like, why would you eat something? If you think about it, okay, you got to get the beans.
Yeah.
Yes, they're very cheap. I understand the economic component of it. They're extremely cheap. They come in dry form. You have to soak them overnight. Who has time for this? Soak them overnight. I don't even know how else you make beans. Then you boil them?
Yeah, you got to boil them. Or you sprout them. Oh my God.
So you spend like hours prepping this one food, and then you eat it, and then it makes you fart a lot. Yeah, no thanks. I think I'm just going to have some kale.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. To properly prepare it takes days. It's not
worth. The payoff is so minimal. It's not worth it.
It is ridiculous. Yeah, and that's what I tell people. I try and pound in their head is you want it simple. That's what I'm all about. Is keep it simple. And if you've got to spend days or several hours preparing one food, you probably should let that one go. I like to eat quick. I like to make, throw my veggies, get some protein in there, some fat, and I'm gone. I'm done.
Yep.
You know, I don't have to sit around and wait 45 minutes for my rice to cook. And, it just doesn't make any sense. So
yeah, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. Well, I think we've made a pretty clear point on this, and I don't want to pound it in the ground because it can get really confusing. But the main things we want to relay is grains and beans, legumes are not paleo. No matter what Chris Kresser says, no matter what whoever says, they're not paleo. And we're not saying that they're not a food group or that maybe you cannot eat them. What we're saying is paleo is pretty well defined. And once you start tweaking the definition, well, it's something else now. And now you're starting to confuse people. That's my problem with it.
It's a template. It's a template. You have to self-experiment. I will agree with that. But it's kind of it's true. Most people are going to have issues with beans and grains.
Yeah.
If you think you're the unicorn that doesn't, then don't bother with paleo, I guess. I don't even know what to say about that.
Exactly. Try something else. And if it doesn't work, and that's why I tell people, hey, paleo isn't the end all to all diets, so either is primal. But I'll tell them that I've been at this a long time. I've had a lot of health issues from the standard American diet like everyone else. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, you can probably pretty much trust me on a couple of these issues that paleo and primal, from all the dieting, all the stuff I've experimented with and worked with people, it's the best that I have found, period.
Well, right. You wouldn't have written a book about it. You wouldn't be having these interviews. You wouldn't be putting your faith into it if you didn't truly believe that based on principle.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm trying to explain as well.
These are self-evident truths to you and I because we have, done these things, made ourselves healthier, know what makes us not so healthy. We've gone through the trial and error process, and this is what we believe in. This is our tenet.
Yeah, and for me, the book, I tell people that what makes me different too is I never write or talk about anything I have not done myself. Mm-hmm. To me, that's just something, a standard that I hold myself to. Why am I going to talk about something that I know nothing about? Everyone can use Google today. There's more information than we ever need. And
there's too much information.
There's too much.
It's too much.
And if you don't know what you're looking for, well, the internet is nothing but basically a universe of zeros and ones. I can use the internet in a certain way because I know when I'm researching something, I know what I'm looking for.
Right.
That's a big difference. If you go there and you don't know anything about paleo or primal or changing your diet, you jump on there, oh man, it is just a nightmare. And you're going to be more confused than before you searched, or after you searched than before. Mm-hmm. And that's why we hope we're getting across that, we're here to help people, I think Nicole is outstanding at what she does, and she cooks a lot of tasty, tasty meals, which I've cooked myself, and they don't include beans and grains.
Absolutely not. 100% paleo when I cook.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a great discussion, and hopefully if anyone has any questions, we've been getting them on YouTube. Feel free to hit us up or hit us up on our websites. Mine's www.primalpowermethod.com, and Nicole's is
www.californiapaleokitchens.com.
Excellent. Alrighty. Well, have a good one, and I will talk to you later, Nicole.
Talk to you next time.
Alrighty. Bye.